Welcome to Module 13, Marketing Cost and Pricing of the Fearless Farm Finances series. Today we're going to discuss marketing costs and pricing, and note that this is covered in chapters 18 and 19 in the book Fearless Farm Finances, and it starts on page 167. So we're going to try and answer the question that most farms ask themselves quite continuously is, what is your best market, and how do you compare marketing costs with all of your market options? So some bullet points that we're going to cover today is diversification is key, evaluating income potential, developing marketing budgets, determining your cost to market, allocating marketing costs from whole farm records, initial market choice evaluation, a secondary market, assessing an institutional market to sell the remaining product, next steps, pricing, a diversity of pricing considerations, and finally, price markups and gross margins. So let's say you've decided that you will direct market as part of your mix. The ways you sell your products can be diversified by where you sell your products. So you don't have to have a ton of diverse products in order to have diversity. Each market is uniquely different and you should approach them differently. Let's say you have a CSA and you also sell to a farmer's market. So you can have diversity within the products that you box in your CSA boxes, but you can also take that diversity to your farmer's market. Now, how you approach and market your CSA is probably going to be different and should be approached different than how you approach the farmer's market. Same with wholesale, same with restaurant sales, same with institutional markets, and we'll go through a little bit of those, but try not to get too bogged down in the details, but understand that yes, every market is different and those details are important when you start assessing them. Selling to only one market or customer can have huge impacts in both positive and negative, but I just want to note that if you only have one market and you lose it, the risk is huge. So understand the risks of doing that as well. So how do you know which markets make the most sense for your farm? So we're going to try and walk through some examples here within this webinar. So evaluating income potential. When evaluating a current or potential market, look at its overall income potential and how it fits with the scale and the profits that you want for your business. So do you want 160,000 versus 30,000 of profit? Those are vastly different, and what you want for your business is going to determine a little bit about your potential market or your current markets. If you can, try to ask historical trends of potential markets to find the total potential. So for some of you, like I said, maybe it's a current market and you're starting to question when you first looked at its potential, you made some assessments and you made some decisions, and maybe now you're going back and using some of your actual numbers. Or maybe you realize there's bigger potential than what you even initially thought. So if it's just a potential market, try to maybe pick the brains of other farmers selling there. Maybe there's a market person that is already there, someone in charge of that particular market, or maybe it's the produce manager at a natural grocery store or at your food co-op. See if you can get some historical trends to help you with some of your assumptions that you're going to be doing when you're trying to evaluate income potential. The other thing is listen to your gut. And too many times sitting down with farmers and they say, I should have just went with my gut reaction. So the book notes this, and I note this because I think it is a really important decision, is gut check on a particular market. What makes sense to your farm's bigger picture? Is this feel good? Does there something like, yes, it's pointing in the right direction, but something is a little fishy? You can usually assess those things, and maybe it's not pencil to paper assessing, but what is your gut check? And these aren't going to be perfect, but hopefully it can get you in the ballpark to help you understand and consider if a certain market is right or not. So like we've talked about in a lot of these modules, and you're probably going to get sick of us talking about it, is developing market budgets. But usually some of the best decisions come from taking the time to sit down and put the numbers to the paper. So how do you compare a few markets that you may want to consider? Here again, we're going to say prepare a market budget for each potential market. So start by estimating your marketing costs, and those are all the costs associated with marketing and delivery of the product from your farm to your customers. So maybe that's a direct drop to a bunch of CSA customers. Maybe that's to a farmer's market, to an institution, wherever that means, from your farm to your customer. That also includes any post-harvest handling, processing, packaging and storing, or packing and storing, as well as labor used to sell this. Invoice and delivery, all of that. Some other pieces to consider and also include are, what are the infrastructure needs? What do you use for coolers or need for coolers? Storage facilities, vans and trucks used for delivery. All of those things are going to come with a cost, and maybe you already have them on your farm, and so it's easy to assess what are those costs. And maybe you have to make some assumptions because you're starting to explore, and maybe you have the coolers and storage facility, but you don't have the best truck, or you need to update from a van to a truck. So trying to really use the best numbers that you possibly can in developing these marketing budgets. Create a separate marketing budget as a worksheet in your annual budget will be really helpful. And for those of you using computer programs, you probably, if you have actual numbers, you can do this by some of the reports, and maybe it won't be perfect, but you can get most of the numbers by some of the reports within your computerized bookkeeping system. And if you're using the paper copy, like I said, just create a separate worksheet to help it make sure that you're keeping track of it and that you're keeping it separate from the rest of your numbers. I think you'll appreciate the time that you spent doing it versus the decisions that you'll be able to make with it. Okay, so I'm going to run you through, and this example is in the book on page 169, but I think it's a fairly practical example, and it gives us kind of the numbers that are really at the guts of developing these marketing budgets. So let's assume that your farm has a choice between selling your produce at a farmer's market and to a small institutional market. So pick a hospital or a long-term care center, whatever institute that might be within driving range from your farm. Your production at this point is not large enough to sell wholesale through larger marketing outlets. So that's why we're taking a look at these two. You do have enterprise records on your farm, and so you've been able to keep track of all these numbers. For this example, tomatoes will be the crop used. So understand that we're going to use tomatoes, but these same principles apply to no matter what direct market that you're going into or whatever product you're selling. So it could be apples, cheese, cuts of meat, honey, you name it, you can do this for it. So after doing your enterprise analysis for this tomato example, you determine that you have a break-even cost of 44 cents per pound. Production cost, I should say. Your total tomato production is 800 pounds. So you have to market, that's what you have to work with. You have 800 pounds of tomatoes to be marketed. Your 2 marketing outlet choices are available about 40 miles away from your farm. The farmer's market is twice a week, and your institutional buyer, you would just be doing once a week. So the price you receive at a farmer's market is usually full retail, whereas your institutional customer is only willing to pay 65% of the full retail price. On average, you sell 95% of the tomatoes or produce that you sell at the farmer's market. You sell 95% of it, and the other 5% currently you're donating to a food shelter. So preparation for, traveling to, operating the booth, tearing down and traveling back and forth from each farmer's market takes about 6 hours. And like I said, you do it twice a week over a 10-week production season. And the pounds of tomatoes that you take to market, it varies a little bit, but on average, you take 40 pounds of tomatoes every week to the market. All right, so the institutional market that you're going to evaluate varies, same thing. Your pounds vary weekly, but within the season, you can sell all 800 pounds of tomatoes. And they place their orders 2 weeks in advance. So you kind of know what you have to get ready to take to that market. All of the time to complete any paperwork as well as storage and handling of the tomatoes is about the same regardless of whether you're going to go to the farmer's market or the institutional market. So what I have in front of you, and you might have quickly followed, is kind of the numbers that we pulled from your enterprise budget on the farm. So the total estimated cost to produce tomatoes and market them through the farmer's market, you'll see, is $1.97 per pound. So let's break that down. We say that you are going to the farmer's market 20 weeks and twice a week. So you have 40 markets. It's 50 cents a mile, and you totaled that it takes 3,200 miles for the season, equaling a total of $1,600 just for transportation. Labor charges, it takes 2 people at 12 hours per week, 20 weeks, and $12 an hour. So if you do 20 weeks times 12 hours times $12 per hour, you have a total of $5,760 in just labor charges. All of your supplies for the farmer's market is roughly about $20 a week for a total of $400 for the season. Your total transaction costs for the season then, if we add up transportation, labor, and supplies, is $7,760. The total transaction cost allocated to the tomatoes. So you say, of all of that, you estimate that tomatoes are about 15% of your market. So in all of your produce that you take, tomatoes are 15%. So if we took 15% of the total transaction cost, that would get us $1,164 just for tomatoes. So the total pounds, cost per pound for just the tomatoes, and remember that we're not selling all 800 pounds, you're selling about 95% of those, so 760 pounds, divided by our total cost is $1.53 per pound of tomatoes. So if you go over to the right in the green circle, so we take that $1.53 for our marketing cost plus our 44 cents, and that's our total production cost. Remember back, we just said that when we did the enterprise budget on tomatoes, our production costs were 44 cents. Add those two together, and we know it's $1.97 to market, to raise and market the tomatoes through the farmer's market. So on the bottom, you'll see we did the same for the institutional market. So transportation expenses, we actually only are going there once a week. So 50 cents a mile times 1,600 miles is $800. It doesn't take as many people. You don't have to stand at the market. And so it only takes one person at 4 hours per week to just get everything ready, package and deliver them. 20 weeks. So 4 hours a week times 20 weeks times $12 an hour is $960. And then supplies, since we're doing it in bulk, we do have to buy different containers and a few other supplies. So it's actually a little more expensive at $30 a week or $600 for the season. Total transaction cost for the season then would be $2,360. We're estimating that the tomatoes are 20% of that. So 20% of the total transaction cost, $354. And then the total transaction cost per pound, and actually, I'm sorry, that very bottom one, instead of 760 pounds, it should actually be 800 pounds. So, sorry, that is actually a mistake in the slide. So we know that if we divided 800 by 354, we'd get 44 cents. So if we combine our 44 cents of marketing cost plus 44 cents of cost to produce, that gives us a total of 88 cents per pound for the institutional market. Now that's just to cover your cost of production and marketing, assuming that 15% marketing allocation cost. So hopefully, there's just that one mistake, one mistake in the bottom of that chart. So does that make sense? Does that make sense to sell to the farmer's market and to the institutional market? So which market will return the most profit? It depends on what prices you receive for the produce in the two markets. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that towards the end of this module about pricing. So by doing this, the minimum, you have to charge $1.97 at the farmer's market and 88 cents per pound for the institutional market to cover all of your costs. And that's actually not any profit. So then whatever above that would hopefully be your profit, like I said, if all of these numbers are accurate. So allocating marketing costs from whole farm records. So let's say you didn't have all those nice, neat numbers previously, or you have them, but you just kind of want to do the down and dirty. So what if you just have your whole farm records from, let's just say, your Schedule F, or you just, like I said, don't want to take the time to do an enterprise analysis, but you still want to know possibly what market might make the best mix for your products. So from your Schedule F or your tax records, you have all of your product inputs. So seed, your soil mix, any soil amendments, all of that stuff. You have your hired labor. You have all of your packaging and handling costs and supplies. You know your depreciation on any equipment, buildings, that kind of stuff. You have your land rent. In addition to your whole farm records, you do have your marketing expenses. So what does it cost for tables at the farmer's market? What have you paid for supplies, trucking, processing, all your vendor fees, and then any extra hired help? So in this particular analysis in Schedule F, you don't keep track of your family labor unless you pay yourself. But like many small farms, a lot of people don't pay themselves. There's always some non-paid labor. Make sure when you're allocating marketing costs, make sure that you add that back in. And that's often one of the largest costs on most of our small farms. And so we don't want to cut ourselves short. We want to make sure we have a sustainable business. So let's assume, and you'll notice on the very right hand side, I have dollars per 3-acre farm. Let's assume you have a 3-acre vegetable farm. That's what you're starting with, that you kept these whole farm records for, and you want to evaluate what is more profitable, selling it through the farmer's market or the institutional buyer. Your sales projections are for total gross revenue of $18,000 per acre if you sold direct through the farmer's market. Direct production expenses include depreciation, land rent. We added back in that non-paid family labor, and all of those are $10,440 per acre. Or you could look at it and say that's 65% of sales. So if you subtract 10,440 from the total gross of 18,000, you get a production profit margin, so revenue minus costs, of $7,560. Now let's say you have a net farm income goal of $3,600 per acre. So if we quick do the math, we know that if we subtract that from our total profit margin, that gives us a $3,960 marketing cost left to work with. So you say, okay, is that enough? So given the gross revenue, your production cost, your net farm income percentage, and the amount of dollars left, you can times that by your 3-acre farm. And then you can ask yourself, can you reach your can you reach your markets for this given amount? So is that $3,960 per acre, or a grand total of $11,880? Is that enough to do all of your marketing for all of your produce or whatever you're producing on this particular 3-acre farm? So carrying that forward, let's say you have several retail and wholesale market outlets available within a certain driving radius of your farm. There is an urban farmer's market that's a little further away, so it's 80 miles from this farm. And you're thinking about 60% of all of your produce could be sold at this market, and then the remaining 40% will be sold through other markets, possibly the last two that you evaluated. Remember that projected sales volume and your overall production estimates will not always be the same, so you'll have to allow for losses through storage and handling, as well as it's rare that every week you're going to go to the farmer's market and completely sell out. So know that you'll have some returns from the farmer's market. So the total of your preparation, setup, sales, and teardown time, including driving to and from the market, are about 9 hours. So 2 people will be needed to be on site at all times. So a total of 18 hours. That's why there's those 18 hours there. And because of the potential volume for business at that market, that's why you choose to take 2 people. Round trip mileage is 160 miles, so that's the next line down. At 50 cents a mile is $80. All of your marketing supplies, annual costs for your signage, tables, maybe your tent, and then vendor fees for this particular market are estimated at $50 per day. So you'll notice this particular chart in front of you, and you'll notice in the very header it's on a per day. So given your total, then you'll see 50 plus 216 plus 80 gives you an estimating marketing cost of $346 per day. So your total, if you go down to below, your total estimated farmer's market cost for this particular one for the season would be $6,920. So take your day times your 20 weeks, because that was what this particular market was. And then given that you think you'd sell 60% of your produce here, or any given production, whatever, maybe it's not produce. The estimated marketing dollars you'd have available for this market would be $7,128. So 60% of the total $11,880 from the last table. So right here, when we flip back, right here, this total, this is your total for your 3-acre farm. And now we're taking 60% of it because you're thinking that you're going to sell 60% of your total production. So since the projected marketing cost is less than the marketing allowance, you figured this market would probably make economic sense if all goes as planned. So you only had 60% at that first market. So now you're going to look for a secondary market. Perhaps you have a smaller farmer's market that's closer to your farm. You predict that of the remaining 40% of your total sales, you think that 30% could be done through this market. So 75% of your total that's left of the 40%. Because of the lower sales volume, you only think it will take one person that would be needed each week. And so your estimated cost per day, as you can see in front of you, are less. So the cost per marketing day is substantially less at this market. So $131 versus the $346 from our previous urban market. And that gives us an annual cost of that second bullet point, $2,620. So that's taking 131 times 20 market days. So potentially the same market plan, 20 weeks. And there again, this annual marketing cost is also lower than the allocated marketing cost of $3,564. So going back to when you allocated $11,880 for your 3-acre, I'm just saying vegetable farm. If we take 30% of it, I would allocate $3,564, and when we just factored it, it's less than. So it still makes sense to potentially do this market. So what about the remaining amount of product that you still have left? So you're thinking that 90% of your total production can be sold through the first two, so the urban farmers market and the local farmers market. Therefore, a third, you're going to look at a third marketing outlet because you say, all right, I'm going to try and get rid of 100% of my produce. You're going to look into a local market at let's say a local institution, a care center, or a hospital. So I just have up in the corner an institutional market. Changes to the estimates for gross revenue, percentage of production costs to gross revenue, and marketing cost allowance need to be made for this kind of new market since it will require probably a different pricing strategy. Institutional market will pay a lower price yet. So we're going to estimate to bring in 20% lower gross revenues because we know it's an institutional market. Rather than $18,000, you could expect $14,400 per acre. So when we went back to doing your goals, that's where we're going to make the adjustments. So right here on this total revenue, gross revenue, instead of the $18,000 that we wanted for the farmer's market, you're going to make an adjustment for $14,400. It is possible that this institution will pay less than 80% of your farmer's market. That is kind of a going norm. However, it's quite likely that not all of the products you take to the farmer's markets are going to be sold. So throwing things away will reduce your overall sales. Therefore, that's why you're kind of looking at using this as your last price point, so that you would get some profit rather than just throwing it away. So your production techniques and costs are going to be the same regardless if you're selling to the farmer's market or to this institutional market. So we left the production cost the same at $10,440 per acre. And your dollar per acre profit goals also remain the same as well at $3,600 per acre. So we just took a little bit less gross revenue minus our same production costs gave us a production profit margin of $3,960 per acre minus our net farm income that you planned, leave us a total cost of $360 per acre for your marketing costs. So the key question is, can you keep the cost of selling to this institution only, so if you times it by the 3, only $1,080 over a 20-week period? That's kind of your key question, because it's actually your marketing costs you have less to work with than you maybe initially had thought. So to carry on that conversation, you kind of looked at your supplies are going to be about $5. Your labor, 3 hours times $12 an hour, 36. Total transportation, 30 miles at 50 cents a mile is $15. So your total estimated marketing cost is $56. So per week. So if you had 20-week delivery, same schedule as your farmer's market, times your $56, it gives you a total of $1,120 total marketing costs. Since it only be 10% of your total sales, you would take 10% of your total that you had factored, 108. So, or a total of the 1,080. So 108 would be what you have allocated. So if only being used for 10% of sales, this market is actually not cost effective, because you know that it's going to cost you, that very first bullet point, if we did our numbers right, $1,120. And if we're allocating 10% of our total marketing allowance, it would only be $108. So unless you can cut somewhere, this actually might not make sense. So can you keep the cost of selling to this institution only $1,080 over a 20-week period? So it's clear that if you used only 10% of your sales, this market is not cost effective. And this happens quite often. Your numbers are not going to work perfectly, which is why it's helpful to look at it. Or it's helpful to say, all right, can we be creative? Maybe it's already on our way. Maybe we, the transportation, yes, we should allocate something, but we're headed right by. We could do it the same day. Maybe you need to think logistically of how you could cut some of these costs to still make it work. So what is your next step is kind of laying all of those out together so that you can see them side by side. So both the urban and small farmers market allowed you to meet your financial goals based on your whole farm records. Unfortunately, you estimated that you could only sell 90% of your total projected production at a farmer's market. So what should you do now regarding the other 10% of your production? There again, now you can go back to the drawing board and say, are there other outlets, such as maybe there's a CSA that you could work with? Maybe you could do a U-pick. Maybe you bring some of it home and you have your own on-farm stand, depending on where you're located. There might be other market venues that you could analyze as part of your combination, but there again, you know that local institution probably doesn't make the most sense, because when you go down to marketing balance versus allowance, we do have a negative $1,012. So what would happen to the marketing cost if 3 different marketing outlets were served locally? What would happen if you sold products at 2 farmers markets along with the other 10% to an institutional market that might make more sense? All of these things is kind of what lays this graph out, and what this chart is just recapping what all of my previous slides had said. Hopefully that makes sense. And like I said, if you have a chance to put the book in front of you, like I said, it's hard to put all of these together. And so that's what combining these two farmers markets and institutional market, hopefully that's what this chart was able to do. But the point being that create a marketing budget for each of your current markets after you're done with the season or potential markets. And it's not going to be perfect if you're evaluating potential markets. Get as close to actuals as you can. It just informs your decisions at which marketing outlet option makes the most sense. The other thing we didn't really talk about at all in this section, but you'll note that a lot of farmers do, is make sure you really track labor well. Sometimes these markets sort themselves out based on simple, how much labor do you have, how much labor are you willing to work with, and it gives you other options to look at if you don't. The other thing is, just because a market can be very successful one year doesn't mean that it's going to be successful the next year. And there again, it goes back to that gut feeling. Sit down with whomever your farmer's market go-to person is, or whoever you're selling direct to at an institution, or whether that be a hospital, nursing home, a school. Even if you're selling direct to restaurants, sitting down with them before you're even planning your season production is really helpful. People change, scenarios change, new competitors come in, values are reevaluated, profitability on their side is reevaluated. So there again, sitting down, having the conversation, going through your numbers, and then asking your gut check again is all critical pieces in this marketing step. So, like I promised, we're going to talk a little bit about pricing. This can be a really difficult task, especially those of you who are new to farming or looking at taking a new product or taking a product to a new market. In general, just something to remember, the closer you are to the final retail customer, the higher price you should be expecting to charge for your product. And while a high price might look appealing, you also have to remember that why you're getting a high price. The closer to your final retail customer, your costs and risks are usually increased. So that's usually why you want to increase your price, so that you're hopefully going to cover hopefully you're covering your costs, but also the risk that's included in taking those extra risk when you're going direct. So I just wanted to put a few plugs in here. Once you've decided to direct market, you must decide how much to charge for your product. And I put many new farmers, but many farmers have a tendency to start out pricing too low. And there might be very variable reasons for that. You're just not secure enough in your belief to produce the quality product that you're going to demand that people pay. Maybe you're testing out a market so that you want to introduce your product, but you introduce it too cheaply just so that you can test it out to see if people are interested. And the third one is actually a real one that I bump into a lot, and you might not even know what a fair price is in consideration of what it's costing you to raise whatever produce, animal, whatever product that you're putting out on the market. So I feel pretty strongly about this next point. You owe it to yourself and fellow farmers to charge a fair price. So do your due diligence and know what it's going to cost. Keep track of that even within the season. And please just charge a fair price so that you make sure you're covering your cost of production, what it's taking you to market, and then hopefully you have some profit left over. So there's a variety of ways to price products. All pricing decisions should take into consideration the customer, your competition, and the cost to grow and market the product. And we'll jump into this next. So there's 3 ways that people go against this pricing, or go up against pricing, and how to consider pricing. The first one is customer-based pricing. And that is exactly what it says. It focuses on how the customer values the product that they're purchasing. So what are the characteristics that encourages a customer to buy your product? Is it because it's organic? Is it because it's sustainably grown, pasture raised? All of those marketing terms do have some characteristics that tell your customers why to choose your product over others, or why they might choose your product over others. What are benefits customers attach to those certain characteristics? So do they attach that it's healthier food, sustainable community? There's many benefits that they attach to those characteristics. And then what is the perceived value of those characteristics and benefits? So you may be able to charge a higher price because your customers are convinced that your product provides them a higher value and it's exactly what they're looking for. So if you're going to price your products on that, you're mostly using customer-based pricing. The second way is competition-based pricing, and that, there again, focuses on what the competition is offering and at what price. So to assess this, you must understand how many competitors are in your market, how much product they are providing to your proposed customer base, and where competing products are grown. Another question might be how much other products might compete with yours. How similar of a product is it? How important are the differences to your customers? So, for example, are your tomatoes locally grown, heirloom, picked that day, and certified organic? Well, maybe that your customer base focuses on that. However, maybe it's very different, and the other competition in your area is a conventionally grown hybrid, picked the week earlier, and shipped thousands of miles. So although you can see your tomatoes or broccoli or meat are not the same, you might ask yourself, is your particular customer willing to pay more for the difference in your products versus the others that they might be currently buying? So this brings back the issue of customer-based pricing. So if the customer doesn't care about the differences, then your price competition will be, the cheaper, probably well-traveled product in the conventional hybrid. So this is at the point that you need to make a choice, and you can either accept that the customer is unwilling to pay for the differences, and then you probably need to find a different customer or different market that will do a lot of the work to educate your potential customers, or find the market where those potential customers are already located. The other thing is just making sure, it kind of goes back to that marketing. If you're going to market that way, know how that your product is uniquely yours, and then just price accordingly. So the very last pricing consideration is cost-based pricing, and that takes into consideration your cost to grow and market the product. So cost must be determined to ensure that your product is being sold for a profit. Most farms are not in business to break even or lose money, and so as we discussed in chapter 16 or in module 11, I believe, the enterprise budgets, it's important for you to understand your cost of production for each of your products. So only if your products, or at least the majority of them, are being sold for a profit will your farm be sustainable. And that's being sustainable and having a financially viable farm is my goal for all of our farms in our community, and hopefully it's yours as well. So know that, sorry, I jumped ahead. Know that a lot of farms use a mix of these to price their product. Cost-based pricing does not take into consideration what a customer is willing to pay or what the competition will allow your price to be at. So therefore, a lot of them use a balanced approach in setting prices, so that you make sure that you're above your break even. So your break even price is the lowest possible price that you're even willing to consider. And then you go up from there to know, okay, what is your customer value? How does your competition rate in relationship to those things? And then once you've set kind of that lower limit and maybe the upper limit, what your customer is willing to pay, you can work within those what we consider markups or margins to assess your final price and profit potential. So that brings us kind of to the price markups and margin. So the margin is what the seller gets above their cost of production, or if they're purchasing the product, what they cover, what they need to cover their expenses and their profit. So if you're the seller, what do you need above your cost of production and any marketing costs so that you have profit? If the seller is a grocery store, they're purchasing the product from you, so what do they need to cover that cost plus their markup or their profit? And that's considered margin. So just some rules of thumb that the book points out. Grocery stores, produce departments often use a 40 to 45% margin. So their goal is, after loss and shrink, is a minimum of 35%. And so that's why they'll put a 40 to 45% margin on the price after they pay the farmer that they bought it from. Wholesale distributors usually use a lower margin than retail because they just have fewer risks and less costs. And if you look at wholesale distributors, they're usually not on, prime real estate. They're not on a corner. They're not on well-trafficked, traveled areas. And they handle it in bulk. They're not handling it by the apple or by the pound of tomatoes. They're handling it probably by the box or the pallet. And so there's just less loss and shrink with handling in bulk as well. If you're selling direct to the eater, so direct to your consumer, you are assuming the same risks and many of the same expenses as like a grocer. So you should charge closer to retail and have a similar margin as them. And so it's just kind of some rules of thumb that when you're pricing your product to think about. At a farmer's market, you pay for prime real estate, right? You have your stall or your space that you're given, and you're taking time to be there every week or even twice a week. So that has to get entered into your price markup and your gross margin. And then you always risk the risk of being rained out or overstocked. How many weeks do you sell 100% of your product? What happens if it's really cold? You probably, come home with a lot more produce because your customers, for lack of better words, they kind of sometimes are wussies and they want the easy way. And so it's not as nice to then go get their produce if your farmer's market is out in the open. If it's in the enclosed area, sometimes you don't have those risks. So pricing your product according to your risk is an important concept to think about when you're choosing your price markups and your gross margin. So how do margins affect you? It's kind of, will you sell at a retailer or a restaurant? Will you sell to a retailer or a restaurant, or are you going to sell direct to your customer? Understanding the end seller's preferred margin will also dictate how much they pay you for your product. So let's say you're not going to sell direct to a customer, you're selling direct to, like I said, a retailer or a restaurant who then interacts with the end customer. Let's say they offer you a price that's not satisfactory to you. Will you be ready to explain why you believe your product should get a higher price? So how is yours better than what is currently being offered, or how is yours still considered being higher value than maybe something else that they're bumping up against or somebody else that brought a proposal in? So as discussed in the enterprise budget, so chapter 16 or module 11, you may also have some loss leaders, but you want to price your products as a whole for overall profit. So building a sustainable business. So understanding that it takes a lot of hard work and diligence to keep track of your numbers, but you might have a few things that get sold, whether to the farmer's market, CSA boxes, or to a restaurant, that you take a little bit of loss on, or they're at your cost of production. But make sure that you price the rest of your products, so your whole farm, goods and sales that are going out the farm door, above cost of production plus marketing, so that you have profit to bring back, so that you're going to be in business for years to come, and that you can probably continue building on that profit, and continue creating relationships with those customers. So, kind of just to wrap up both this marketing and pricing discussion, understand that many of you will have multiple marketing outlets, and just do your math and understand what the right mix is for your farm. Now, I say that you will have a mix, but maybe it is only one market. Maybe you have a really good relationship and that's been built over time. So you've been able to go down to 3 or 4 markets all the way down to just this one and focus on this one, and you have a great working relationship with that market. That's fine. Understand that you still have risk, that if that market goes away, you're back in the market for finding new markets. So and that's why on a lot of our farms that we'll see have multiple marketing outlets. The other consideration we didn't talk about it all in this, is what are your strengths and weaknesses of you individually or the people on your farm. There are farms that I work with that love farmers market. It's not their number one marketing outlet, but they love connecting with people, and that's a source of energy that they get every week that keeps them going. So take into consideration those strengths and weaknesses that each individual person has, and what do they need to be fulfilled as well. Use your whole farm numbers, enterprise budgets, and estimated marketing costs to generate data to inform you of your best decisions. Once again, this whole book is really based on, like it says, fearless farm finances. So taking the fear out of it, taking the time. Nobody's going to tell you that it doesn't take time. It does take time. But there again, if you go back to some of the modules and getting your system set up right, hopefully using the computerized system allows you to do some of the pulling of this data quicker for better decisions for your farm. Pricing products can be challenging, but knowing your cost is the only way to ensure a price that will allow profit. Understanding margins is helpful when making pricing decisions. And there's some rules of thumbs in the book, but know that doesn't get followed all the time, and keeping those, like they say, rule of thumb, and having some flexibility and understanding those will be extremely useful to you. The bottom quote, a person who never made a mistake never tried anything new. And I really felt like that goes to all kinds of things in farming, but really marketing. For many of us, for those of you who marketing is your thing, kudos, that's awesome. It's going to make your farming business even stronger. But for many of us, production is the piece we enjoy, and marketing comes with a lot of mistakes. So hopefully the mistakes don't eat you alive, but you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes in any given market. And so just be willing to try, be willing to be flexible, take on new risks, new opportunities, all within reason, using the numbers that you have for your farm. So with that, good luck. Have fun with the marketing. And there again, if you're not a marketing person, get help from someone. Take on the challenge of finding someone who is good and learn from them, or hire them. So best of luck with marketing and pricing. And this concludes this module, the marketing and pricing module of the Fearless Farm Finances. For all of the Fearless Farm Financial webinars, you can see them at the link right there. And we want to thank the USDA National Institute of Food and Agricultural Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program for making all of these webinars possible through the help of their funding.